Welcome, everyone, to Integrating QuickBooks Online with Clio. I want to put a disclaimer at the front of this. I want to make sure everyone's expectations are set. This presentation is for people who maybe they've just set up QuickBooks recently, or they've had it for a little while, but they don't really understand how to fully utilize it, or maybe even if you looked at setting it up and it just seems like a big whale you don't want to deal with. That's the idea here. I want to run through what QuickBooks will do in relation to Clio and make it more comfortable for everybody. So if anyone here is looking for like a really advanced, crazy detail on how QuickBooks operates, you're in the wrong place. I don't want to disappoint you. So, how's everybody doing being in person Clio Con this year? Thank you for the engagement. That is better than being on Zoom. I asked the same question on Zoom. How's everybody doing? Crickets. Nobody's even got their camera on. So happy to be in the same room with all you guys. We'll move on to the next page here. Like I said, Clio and QuickBooks Online. There are many things that QuickBooks Online can do to help up-level your experience and simplify your accounting in relation to Clio. So you don't need to be an accountant to set it up. Don't get me wrong, being an accountant can help. I'm not gonna lie. That's just the bottom line. But so I should actually probably introduce myself. My name is Kyle. No, I'm not on the product team that helps integrate QuickBooks into Clio. I'm not that smart. I am just in support. I'm actually now what's called a solutions specialist. So I handle some of the more complicated things that can come through support, or maybe even new product stuff. So if you've signed up for Clio payments in the last year, there's a chance I've interacted with you on that because it was a new product. But like I said, I'm no accountant, I'm no developer, and you can still do this with QuickBooks. I barely passed math in school, and I can still figure this out. So we can all get through this together. So today we're going to break down the basics of QBO and Clio, go through what the integration process actually looks like, and things like exporting invoices to QuickBooks, getting trust information over there, and even bringing over hard cost expenses into Clio. So, what are the benefits? We are looking at trying to save you time. We want to avoid double entry, simplify the process. Don't put something in Clio and then, did you put it into QuickBooks? Did your assistant put it into QuickBooks? Did you put it in there twice because you thought you didn't and now you did? Like I said, simplify that experience. Of course, we want to stay compliant too. Like everybody in here always has that little bit of fear in the back of their head. Want to make sure you're staying compliant, especially when it comes to trust. And then of course, when it comes to make better decisions, when it comes to staying informed on what QuickBooks can do for you, what you're doing with your trust accounting. Like I said, again, keeping that compliant. So my favorite thing is talking about the different plans because as you all have probably seen, we've recently updated our plan branding. So now we have on the Clio side of things, Essentials, Advanced, and Complete. And for any of our more international customers, we have Standard and Premium. And of course, QuickBooks has Essentials, Plus, and Advanced. So you're never going to get those confused, I promise. So understanding the basics of how it works. When it comes to items that sync over from Clio to QuickBooks Online, we're looking at things like contacts, approved bills, trust transactions, and of course, payments. Key things to set up ahead of time on that sync, though, is you're looking at products and services in QuickBooks. You're looking at your sync forward dates. You're going to hear me say sync forward dates about 18 times in the next 20 minutes. It is important. And of course, setting up your trust account. Now, one important note when it comes to how the information goes over to QuickBooks, QuickBooks is an accounting software, not specifically a legal accounting software. So QuickBooks doesn't identify things like matters. So it's all based on the contact. That's why contacts sync over to QuickBooks. So transactions, trust balances, all of that is based on the contact. You'll never see any matter information show up in QuickBooks. Now that we've talked about kind of what it can do for you, let's go through the actual steps to connect the two programs. Keep it simple. Remember this image. I've said before, contacts, bills and payments, and trust transactions. All of those go from Clio to QuickBooks, not the other way around. If you enter in a transaction into QuickBooks, you're not bringing it back to Clio. Clio will not pull that information. For the longest time, I referred to it as a one-way sync. And then we updated it, and now we have hard costs. So it's not quite just a one-way sync. I had to unlearn telling people that in support for a while. So that's the one thing that QuickBooks does send to Clio is hard cost expenses, because we know a lot of people enter that information. So you can get a little bit more detailed with it in QuickBooks. So that is the one piece of information that will go the other way. Everything else this way. So just remember this image, help you stay on track. Okay, so now if we follow along with this video here, we'll see how to actually get to the page where you connect QBO to Clio. So you're over here in your settings, you go ahead and click bill syncing, and you can see we have two options here. So we're gonna go ahead with QuickBooks Online. That's what we wanna connect today. That's what I'm talking about. When we get to the next page, once you've selected your QuickBooks account, you're going to look at a number of different options, starting with syncing your bills. So you'll need to make sure you're mapping everything to the different possible fields that you have in QBO. QBO tracks everything we send over as line items linked to a particular product or service that you've created. So now another thing here, I'm going to have a few different examples over the slides. Every firm operates a little differently. The wording on what you call a product or service, how you want it to be tracked, might be based on what your bookkeeper particularly likes. So don't look at everything as in stone the way you have to do it. This is a general guideline, a good example. So, for example, expense entries. You could list them as reimbursable expenses. And then you have time entries, could be listed as hours, or time entries, or service. I interact with so many different firms that have their own catchy way of tracking it in QBO. Like I said, specific titles, totally up to you and how your firm wants to operate. All right, first time I'm going to bring it up here again, the sync forward date. Now, this, I'm telling you, I'm going to keep harping on this because it comes up in support so often. Most of the time when someone comes in and they say, hey, something I put in Clio is not going over to QuickBooks. I recorded a payment, I generated a bill, I have a trust transaction. Why isn't it syncing? We're looking at errors, we're trying to find some kind of problem. It's the sync forward date. The sync forward date is the starting date of data you want to sync over. So in this example here, we have the sync forward date as March 22nd, 2022. So let's say your bill had an issue date of November 1st, 2021. So you're looking at 4 months before that. So your bill is not going to show up in QuickBooks. Got a different sync date. So you want to start a date that will encompass all the work that you want to send from Clio into QuickBooks. What's actually really funny is after I started writing this presentation, I got on a bit of an escalated call with someone who was having a bunch of problems with their QuickBooks account. And this was the exact problem. I was in the middle of writing the script, and the example here, the payment wasn't syncing over, because the payment was June 1st. So like, oh, it's after the sync forward date. Why isn't it syncing over? The bill is before the sync forward date. So it doesn't matter that the payment is after the sync forward date. The bill doesn't see it. So keep that in mind, sync forward date. I'm going to say it 7 more times. Now, for those that choose to get QBO Plus or Advanced plans, you get an extra special feature. You can track firm users and their activities within QBO using the class system. So what does that mean? That means when you have Jessica entering time and billing into Clio, that will sync over into QuickBooks, and you'll be able to see that the time is associated with her. Now, if you're only on QBO Essentials, you're not going to have that feature. But it doesn't matter what Clio plan you have. If you have Clio Essentials or Clio Advanced, that feature doesn't matter. That's purely based on your QuickBooks account. So this feature will allow you to report on your team's efforts within QBO. That can help with things like payroll and bonuses. Of course, depending on how each of your firms are structured, everyone's going to be a little bit different. Now the tracking, like I mentioned, is done by making classes in QBO and then connecting that class to Clio as shown on the screen here. Just like the sync forward date, the bills that you select, just like the sync forward date for the bills, you can select the date in which you want to start tracking this information. So if you only want to start tracking classes as of October 1st, you'll only pull that data. Again, you can backtrack it as much as you'd like. Now, after you've entered all those settings, this is an example of what it could look like. As I mentioned previous, everyone's wording is going to be a little bit different. This is not an exact thing it has to be, but it's a good example. Now, moving on to trust transactions. Exporting your trust transactions is actually super easy. So for the next few minutes, I'm going to break down how that sync works and then even go into our trust check printing feature, which I'm going to tell you I think is an underutilized feature. So Clio Manage and its trust accounting have been deliberately built to the standard of the most restrictive rule. In other words, our default workflows and processes are compliant with the most stringent state rules. We're able to achieve this by ensuring every transaction in or out of your trust accounts is linked to a client or matter. That means you can report on any client's trust account balances at any time, and you can easily generate reconciliations and report for any historical period should the need arise. Again, that's what I was talking about earlier, making sure you are compliant and meeting all the recommendations. So, first thing you're going to do on the Clio side of things is select which trust account you want to sync with QBO. In my example, we've selected the account called Trust. How original. You can also see on this slide, just like the other sync features, we have what? All right, no audience interaction. I'll take it. Sync forward date. I'm going to keep bringing it up. If you can't tell, I've had a lot of calls about this. So, like I mentioned, sync forward date. If you have more than one trust account, though, you can sync both of them, or three of them if you have three. You get my point. At the very bottom there, where it says connect another account. So when you click connect another account, it's going to give you the same options. Keep it simple. Nothing complicated. Same page. So if you have more than one trust account, you can have them both syncing with QBO. Make sure you have all that information going over properly. So, as you can see here, I do have more than one trust account, so it's important that we select the right one. If you want to sync both trust accounts, like I said, we just went through that process. Now, in your chart of accounts in QBO, you'll need both a trust bank account and a trust liability account. Once those are created, you'll be able to choose those accounts and sync your transactions too. Once you've gone through these steps, you're done. You've set up, going forward, transactions in Clio for your trust will automatically sync over to QuickBooks with no manual action required on your point. No more double entry. The last trust-related feature I mentioned is trust check printing. Now I'm going to try again for some audience interaction here. Who uses that currently? 1, 2, 3. Like I said, not that many people. It is not that common. Yeah, I know some of you probably just didn't feel like raising your hand. I get it, you didn't participate in class, it's not your style. I get it. I was the cool kid too. All right. So, with this feature, you'll be able to disperse funds from your client's trust account in Clio and have a check ready to go for them in QuickBooks in one action. So, if you navigate to your client's matter, select the trust account and click the Disperse Funds button. At the top right, this is the first screen that you should see. You can enter the amount, the dates, all the relevant fields for this dispersal of funds you're given back. And then you'll see that print check via QBO button at the bottom. And so then we move on from there. From there, you'll see this screen on the left, confirming the information that you just put in, make sure you got the right amount, all that kind of stuff. Once you click the go to QuickBooks Online to print check, right then and there, you'll see the screen on the right with the check that you just created. You can go ahead and print it if you want. However, you don't have to do it in the moment. Maybe that's not something that you take care of in your workflow. Maybe it's something somebody else does, another attorney, paralegal, anything like that. So if that's a task left for later or another member of your firm, you can click done, and when someone goes into QBO later, they'll see this check on that same screen and be ready to print it. Now, the final feature, this is the one I talked about. We're going the other way now. QuickBooks to Clio, hard cost importing. I mentioned earlier, in support, I forgot this feature existed for the longest time, kept telling everybody it's a one-way sync. Now I put an asterisk on that and I say except for hard costs. So with this feature, you can enter your hard cost expenses into QBO and things like court fees and such. So you can have all that information sync from QuickBooks into Clio. This is the one thing that syncs over. I'm going to keep saying that. I have to really drill it in, just got to make sure. Now, here's what your workflow should look like. Creating the expense in creating the expense in QBO, and it automatically gets sent to Clio. You generate your bill, it gets approved, it syncs back to QBO, and then you get paid, reconcile. The goal with this workflow is to have as little manual work as possible. No more double entering expenses, forgetting which system that you or another coworker in the firm chose to record the expense in. Now it can just be done one spot and move over. Something to remember, though, when the sync happens, when the hard cost comes over from QuickBooks to Clio, is depending on whether or not the client has more than one matter. So if your client only has one matter, then the expense will come from QuickBooks to Clio, be assigned to that matter. End of story, ready to generate a bill. If they have more than one matter, I mentioned earlier, QuickBooks doesn't understand that. They don't know which matter to assign it to. So it'll be in the Activities tab waiting for you to assign it to the appropriate matter. So you can do that quite simply just by finding the activity, like the expense entry in your activity list, editing, and selecting the matter you want it to go towards. Just like every other setting I've gone through, you gotta pick what?
Sync forward date.
Thank you. Sync forward date. This way, you don't have expenses from 3 years ago that you don't care about now start syncing over to Clio, filling up a bunch of unnecessary data. If you want to start from the beginning of the year, beginning of the month, 2 years ago, just pick the one that makes sense where you want the data to start filling in. You'll need to pick the account in which the hard costs come from, just like everything else. We're not just going to magically find them in QuickBooks. We got to be looking in the right place. So in QBO, you'll need to create an account for all your expenses. My example here has it labeled as hard costs. Just like everything else, every firm will be different. Every firm will label it in a way that makes sense for them. This is any hard cost that's going to be going to the client that they're going to be paying you for. So talking about, costs of like running the firm or anything like that, you don't want that information. Now, some key takeaways I want to address from today's workshop. QBO is not that scary. It's the gold standard of accounting software, and that's why we integrate with them. 90% of the sync is one way, other than the hard costs. I'm going to keep saying that again. The integration can greatly improve your efficiency and reduce your double entry if you have it set up correctly. And we have tons of documentation to help walk you through this. We have videos, we have step-by-step instructions, and of course, we have our support team. Who here calls support? I'm not seeing every hand go up. Every hand can go up. Don't be afraid to call support. We are here 24 hours, 5 days a week, and happy to help. Speaking of asking for help, though, that's kind of one of the final things I wanted to mention here is don't be afraid to ask for help. And what I mean by that is, I just spent the last 15, 20 minutes here showing you that you can do it yourself. That being said, doesn't mean you have to. Everyone here, attorneys, legal professionals, paralegals of some kind, you're not necessarily all accountants or bookkeepers. So hiring someone who is more comfortable with this kind of thing can actually end up being more beneficial than trying to do it yourself, even though it might cost you a little bit more. Now, like I said, it's important to have the right person for the job. You want to hire a lawyer when you have a legal problem. You want to hire an accountant when you have money problems. Same idea. So with that in mind, We have a network of Clio certified consultants. These are professionals who've gotten Clio's stamp of approval to help you with things like this. Also, many other aspects of Clio. There's a few of them that actually specialize in accounting, and we are trying to get more and more people who are Clio cheerleaders and Clio experts to do the same. I think there's actually a handful of consultants here at Clio Con this year. We love seeing them. They are so much fun to talk to. I encourage you to seek them out, and if you ever feel like you need a more direct hand outside of just our support team, have a conversation with them. They could be very beneficial for you. Few examples here. I believe at least 2 of them are here this year, if not more. There we go. There we go. Yes. Perfect. Welcome. Glad you're all here. You're amazing partners. So, myself and my colleagues in the back, Matt Ty and Brandy Burton, who helped actually put together all this. I mentioned I wasn't that great in school. I don't like making slides. I'd rather talk. So they took care of all that for me. So I want to thank them. And we're going to be around for the next 5 or 10 minutes, just hanging out in the room. So if you have some kind of follow-up questions or anything you want to talk about, or tell me how good of a job I did, feel free to flag any of us down and we'll be happy to chat. So thank you guys. I hope you learned a little something. Again, my name has been Kyle Bluen. Happy to talk to you guys. And if you want to talk to me outside of this room, I live in the Success Center, so I will be down there.